Hello, viewers. It is me, Mr. Carly, fighting Batman as usual. Today I'm going to talk about zombies as the new westerns. It's going to take me a minute to get there, though. A lot of people think that zombies are a new thing, and their recent popularity is fairly new. But zombies as an idea go back a long way, and I don't even mean just purely in the Revenant sense of something that's dead that comes back to life. I mean specifically the word zombie. The word zombie started in Haiti during slavery time. And zombies were... Haiti had a kind of a mix-up of Christianity and witchcraft called voodoo or voodoo. And it had people who... most slaves were taught to believe in Christianity. So they believed, and this was kind of a tool used on them, they believed that if they served their masters well and were humble and were peaceful and not violent and did all the right things, then they would get to go to heaven when they died and they wouldn't have to work anymore. So one of the really good things about the fact that they did that is they believed that rising up might cost them the ability to rest because they worked their entire lives from, before sun up to after sundown. So quite often the idea of an eternal rest was very, very important to slaves. So the idea of zombies, people who could be forced to work after they were dead, basically the idea was that it was the worst thing they could imagine. Because instead of being rewarded for your proper, decent life, you would still be forced to work even after you were dead. Your body would still be walking around. So that was the worst they could imagine. They were used later. I have a whole deal about infection stories and where they come from. It involves the Smurfs. But what I'm going to talk about today is zombie stories as we tell them now. And zombie stories as we tell them now are actually based on an older set of stories that's actually based on another older set of stories. Most of the modern zombie stories right now are something that a lot of people where I live now are not familiar with, but almost everybody where I came from is familiar with. And that's the Western. Westerns were... I'll get to that in just a second. Westerns, as we know them, actually are based on another kind of story, which is the samurai story. And that's part of why there's all these very, very non-Western ideas in Westerns. Samurai were a group of people in Japan. And one of the things that's hardest for people in modern times to understand is that samurai considered themselves to already be dead. Their death was delayed. And so they believed that in service to their master, they were already dead, even if they were still walking around. So, quite often, samurai would be incredibly self-sacrificing to the point of honor because they considered themselves to already be dead. So, there was really no need for personal glory beyond the glory that was attributed to whoever their superior was. I am dramatically oversimplifying this. If you're actually interested in this, go look up some stuff. The point that matters towards Westerns is that a lot of Western stories had a very similar outlook where they would have these people who were basically Ronin or samurai whose masters were already gone. And they would roam the wasteland fighting inhuman enemies. In Westerns, it was usually people from Mexico or Indians, Native Americans. This was back when we dehumanized Native Americans and Mexicans if we were American settlers. So a lot of those we would take scalps, which was literally just what it sounds like, where when you would kill somebody, you would cut off their scalp and you would turn those in for money. The problem is that you would tan them usually, and it was kind of hard to tell what race the person you took a scalp off of was. So it got really gross really fast. And it was not always, raiders. Sometimes it was literally just killing other even settlers. But in westerns, we have we had a generally very positive view of the cowboy, who would be out there alone fighting and the Man with No Name trilogy is the best example. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Basically, they're the stories of Clint Eastwood, whose character is never named. He just comes into town, and he has been fighting these enemies for so long, and he seems selfish, and he seems rude, and he seems crude, but then somebody inside the community he's just come into town for comfort. Usually takes a bath, maybe gets a hooker, that sort of thing. But for some reason, somebody gets close enough to him to make him realize that this town and community and the comforts of civilization are worth fighting for. So even though he comes in as kind of a mercenary who's been doing bad things in the frontier, he realizes the value of community. And it's usually some plucky kid or some woman with a heart of gold who, convinces him that this town is worth protecting and that he should totally defend them from the Native Americans who are going to attack, or the Mexicans who want to retake it, or whatever. But in modern stories, as we have grown up, we have realized, it's kind of bad to treat a whole race of people as inhuman. And it's one of those things where, like in modern video games, quite often you'll have terrorists. And terrorist is code word for Arabic people now, which allows a lot of racist people to dehumanize Arabic people. The problem is that when I was a kid, the terrorists were not Arabic. The terrorists were Irish, because we had these constant fights between the IRA trying to, free Ireland from the UK, and so there were bombs and all sorts of horrible stuff. There were only two major terrorist organizations when I was a kid that I remember hearing about, and I may have been uninformed. As always, this always has a disclaimer of, I don't know everything. There are lots of things that I just kind of know. But it was the IRA and the PLO. And the IRA was the Irish Republican Army, and the PLO was the Palestinian Liberation Organization. So it was Palestinians and Irish people. Those are who we used to call terrorists back in the day. But now it's codenamed for anyone of Arabic descent. And we have kind of dehumanized them in a lot of video games, making them into soulless monsters that are just, horrific. So eventually people realize, it's kind of bad to consider a whole race of people as inhuman monsters. And that's where zombies come in. Zombies are the perfect mass enemy because they're not human anymore. Because, they may have used to have been your buddy, they may still look like your buddy, but they are only guided by the most basic of instincts, hunger. And so they will, and they're human enough. It's not like, shooting something that is a blob. We're able to use, sighting and hit recognition and all sorts of stuff as if it were a person, but it's not actually a person. So you can have waves and waves and waves of enemies and not have to feel like you're gunning down actual people and not have to have the emotional response. And there's lots of people that don't have the emotional response. They're perfectly fine gunning down waves and waves and waves of strangers. But there are some people that would prefer to have, moral high ground in their shooty games. And there's other reasons why zombies are basically the literary inevitability, but I guess I can tack a little bit of that on here. Zombies are what we fear we are, or they're what we fear other people are. Whenever you think of a horrible enemy that only consumes and does not reason or have spirituality or have humanity. It's how racists think of immigrants. It's how people concerned with the environment think of people who just want to have a steak. It's how people who are vegan think of people who consume animals who could be their friends. It's one of those things that whenever we think of a soulless, unthinking, consuming enemy, we're thinking about zombies. And zombies are representative of all of that. They're representative of our worst impulses. The fact that if you took away our reasoning and our spirituality and our decency and our kindness, then what would be left is zombies. But it also means that, the people on the liberal side think of conservatives as zombies because all they're after is money and they don't really care about anything else and they're willing to sacrifice people's health. But similarly, conservatives think of liberals as zombies and that they just take, and nobody worries about where it's going to come from, and nobody worries about the future, and nobody worries about how it's going to get paid for. So both sides can kind of reduce the other people to just unthinking, uncaring, selfish, consuming monsters. And I mean, that's comforting. It's comforting to be able to say that the other side doesn't think, that the other side is stupid, that the other side is just uncaring and unfeeling and wrong. Because it's much easier to do that than realize, oh, they might have a reason why they believe this thing. They might have a set of reasons. They may have evidence. It's much easier to not believe that people are complicated, to not believe that people might have differing opinions and still be decent people. It's much, much easier to just assume that they are monsters. So, that's, I guess I wandered all over the place there. Zombies and Westerns are very similar in that they usually have singular heroes who, fight the unnatural enemy, be it Mexicans or zombies. I'm not conflating those. I'm just saying that they're treated similarly in Westerns and zombie movies. And that's why most zombie stories that are made in the West, that are made from Europe over, are going to have some weird Western elements to them. Walking Dead, of course, has a great many Western elements, but it's true of a lot of zombie stories, including the Romero stuff like that. Anyway, I'll talk some other time about why zombies are so popular right now. I guess I could do it in brief. It's been 13 and a half. So yeah, I can do it in brief. Okay, so the reason that zombies are super popular right now is that they hit 3 different demographics. Demographics are groups of people. Really, really old people. I say that. Slightly older than me people. I am about 40. I am 40. I'm almost 41. People older than me really, really like zombie stories because a lot of the skills that they have that they worked very hard on that other people just use Google to figure out will be useful again. So older people who know how to build a fence or make a radio out of a bit of wire or know how to make a door that will actually stay shut. Whereas young people can't do those things. Old people have a set of skills that have become kind of unnecessary. So for them, it's a situation where they specifically would love to be able to be useful again. People my age and down to slightly younger have had a really, really rough time, at least in America. And again, I'm not sure if this is culturally relevant everywhere. But the last generation has pitted us against each other for limited resources. We have all these super rich boomers who are also in charge of politics. And so we've been taught that all of the minority people, even like poor white people, are enemies of everybody else. And so we have to fight for what we've been told is very limited resources. Whereas it's really just that the 1% has so many resources that we've been forced to fight it out, kind of like bum fights. And so my generation would be really excited about zombies because suddenly we'd have a real fight. It would be a righteous fight. It would not be a black person beating up a gay person to get their stuff. Instead, we would have people who we wouldn't have to feel bad about fighting. We wouldn't have to feel bad about a white person having to beat a black person to succeed because all the rich people are just watching us fight for what we call limited resources, even though they aren't really that limited. Similarly, younger people, the youngest people, they mostly like zombie stories because they don't understand statistics. And I say that that sounds meaner than it is because my generation's pretty bad with statistics too. But specifically younger people, they believe that if a zombie attack happened and it wiped out 90% of people, they believe they would be in that 10%. And they believe strongly that they would be among the survivors and that it would be fun. So not understanding at all that they would probably perish in the first wave. So it's one of those things where younger people, they only think about the aftermath. They don't think about the during. And they think about, all the how interesting it would be to live in the post-apocalyptic world, not thinking about the apocalypse itself. So part of that is relying on the everyone thinks they're special thing. And I'm not saying that as a complaining about millennials thing. I'm saying that as everybody genuinely believes that. In my experience, and again, I'm a teacher, so I do have experience at this. Everybody seems to believe that the things that apply to most people don't apply to them. So that's why zombies are fairly popular right now, because they appeal to a percentage of old people, percentage of middle-aged people, percentage of young people, and they kind of work for that reason. So that is the basic skinny on zombies. I have more to say, but I've been talking for over 17 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I think I'm just going to title this one Details About Zombies. Zombies is the New Western, something like that. Anyway, nice talking to you, and I hope you have a great week.